Well, let's get back to the American people. Let's talk about the American economy for a minute. So yesterday, we had new inflation data, which is shaking up people's thinking about what the Federal Reserve is going to do when it comes to interest rates going forward, which it just reverberates all throughout the rest of the economy. So we can put up this first element here. So consumer prices rose basically a little faster than they were expected. 0.4% in February, which was 3.2%, a 3.2% rate, slightly higher than expected. Year over year, you saw rent and housing continue to be continue its surge. You saw gas prices contributing to this inflation spike. Even if you take gas prices out, you started seeing this. And so over the last roughly year, wage growth, and particularly wage growth at the bottom, has been outpacing inflation. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Like that's the direction that you want to go. The several years before that, coming out of the pandemic, inflation was rising faster than wages. So basically, you need several years of wages growing faster than inflation to catch back up. Because people aren't pulling prices down, except eggs, actually.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, and also with high interest rates, you have a lot of people, especially in lower income brackets, who went into debt because they were laid off during the pandemic. So many service workers, people in that position, paying high interest rates. So not only does wage growth have to be steady for years, you then also have these high interest rates that are compounding the debt. I mean, it's making the debt worse and worse and a deeper and deeper hole to climb out of. So even if your wages are climbing, you still are going to have a steep hill ahead of you to get out of the debt.
And one thing I think people aren't quite realizing when it comes to how rough this part of the economy feels like is how kind of good it was in 2020. And it's hard to say good in 2020 in the same sentence because you had the lockdowns, you had the pandemic. It was a difficult time, kind of socially and culturally. But when it came to finances, people were doing a lot better because you got all of these direct checks. You had this what they called the super dole, the $600 a week in unemployment. You had multiple checks rolling out. You had checks in March 2020. You had checks again in December 2020. Then you had checks again in February, March 2021. Just your bank account one day like this, you don't do any work, and boom, all of a sudden, thousands of dollars in your bank account.
Like and help to your business if you're a small business
interest
owner.
Rates were down under mortgage interest rates under 3%. And what that did is it allowed basically everybody who had a home at the time refinanced, and their monthly nut went down, and a lot of people cashed out. So they had more cash in their pockets month to month, and they had taken, let's say $10,000, $15,000 out, and they did, and either that padded their savings account for the problems that are that always come up in life, or they did the thing that they needed to do for so long. Repaired the leaky bathtub, got the house painted, whatever. And so to go from that to then prices spiking at 9% back in 2021, and then coming down, but not having enough time to recover, sucks for this economy because you need more time for wages to outpace inflation. A year is not enough. You need 5 years. Actually, I mean, to get back to a humane economy, you would need 100 years of wages outpacing inflation.
So let's put this next element up on the screen from Jason Furman, because Ryan, I'm curious what you made of Jason Furman's analysis. He put some of these numbers into basically he was looking at core services, core goods, and what you're seeing, and this is important, if you're watching this, you go back to about 2010, and the core goods prices are actually all the way to where they are around right now. They have this huge spike around 2021, 2022, and then they've dipped now down to where they were almost in 2014, which is similar to where things were before the pandemic around 2020. Core services spikes right around 2020. It was on kind of a steady climb, but from 2012, roughly around 2010, 2012. But then where it is now is so much higher than where it has been for core services. So that's things like shelter. And Furman specifically calls out shelter. So the cost of rent, the cost of housing, that is way higher than it has been in anyone's recent memory. And that's why some of this is so uneven. So when you're seeing Paul Krugman's analysis that actually everything's fine, it depends. I mean, it just really depends on who you are, what kind of life you live, if you own, if you rent, what your finances look like. This is a really, really tough economy for a lot of people, and for many people specifically because of that core services mark. That is not anywhere near where it used to be, Ryan. It is significantly higher.
And there was this big debate: is inflation transitory? Is it endemic? The transitory crowd, looking at that core goods, I think, can argue, like, from a Keynesian old school perspective, was absolutely correct. That was obviously transitory. Like, you had a stimulus, and you had some greedflation, and you had an opening up of the economy after the pandemic. The price of goods popped, and then the price of goods came back down. That was to be expected and transitory. The services inflation is an endemic problem that is going to need to be sorted out. You've also got home insurance, auto insurance, health insurance, all those other costs, that are just utilities that are just part of your. Some utilities are in core goods that are just kind of part of daily life, and they're just more expensive. And what that does is, you just feel that by the middle of every month. Like it's that amount of money is coming out of your paycheck, and your paycheck isn't going as far as it used to, even as wages did grow for the last year faster than inflation. But you need a lot more than that.
So I actually want to play this clip of Gary Cohn, who's one of Trump's Goldman boys. I think this was on CBS Face the Nation this week, because I think he made a pretty good point in the context of why people are feeling as though the economy isn't great, so Biden is not polling very well in the economy. Again, despite people like Paul Krugman and many, many others, actually, who have said, why aren't this optimism or this pessimism that the public is experiencing is not backed up by data? The media is telling way too negative a story about the economy. Listen to Gary Cohn here.
Inflation has a compounding effect, meaning as you look at inflation year over year, you're adding up those numbers. You're not starting at a zero every year. So if we had 6% inflation last year, 7% inflation, and now we have 4% inflation, that's 10% inflation. So if you take a basket of groceries at the beginning of 2020, just a simple basic basket that cost $100, it costs well over $125 today, because those 4% one year and 7% one year and 7% the next year, they add up. They're cumulative. So there's a huge cumulative effect inflation.
So when people are being told, consumers, you're wrong, inflation's heading, no, they're right.
They're completely right.
Actually
they're completely right. And what they're more right about is we at least finally have gotten to the position where wage growth is faster than inflation. But we had not been there until the last few months. So people were losing purchasing power, and that's why people were angry. And then take on top of that the high interest rate environment, where if you thought you might have been in a position to buy a house because you save money, you go out to get a mortgage at 7 or 8%, you can't afford a house.
So Cohn is now an executive at IBM after leading the Trump National Economic Council. But that is completely accurate, Ryan.
Yeah, right. And as he says, wages finally were growing faster than inflation, which, as somebody who advocated for robust government spending throughout the pandemic, to see wages growing faster than inflation is extremely satisfying.
Vindicating.
And to see unemployment below 4%, which is driving all of this labor militancy and could, and is helping to reshape the political economy, giving more power to workers rather than bosses. Like all of that is a good thing, but tying it in with the greedflation, which was these corporations seeing the opportunity to raise prices and just taking profits and walking away with it, plus the obvious inflation you were going to get from supply chains and just the opening up of the economy after a pandemic, has left people, way behind. So often economists and the news talk about inflation either in month-to-month terms or year-over-year terms. But he's right. Like, we're all adults. Like, we remember what it cost to go to the grocery store 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And we now know what it costs today. And as he's saying, a $100 bag is now a $125 bag.
And
that's a huge problem.
one of the reasons I think we talk about it in that context is because, like this report, so this is the BLS data, that's what we're talking about. We started with the CNBC tear sheet about that. They put out the monthly data, they put out the year-over-year data on inflation, and so that's what the media calls like the hook. And that's economists are in the weeds analyzing changes in specific aspects of the baskets on the month-to-month basis, because that's what's relevant every single month when
Sometimes
you're
you
looking at
get a bird flu and eggs are super expensive, but you're like, well, it's not a macroeconomic issue.
Right.
That's all the birds got killed.
Right. But if you're just a consumer, if you're not a member of the media or an economist, so 99% of the population, the year over year is what really matters to you, because you're comparing it to what you were paying before and what your wages were before.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's obvious that's how people think about normal.
And also,
think
yes,
about it.
and inflation for the most part and price growth is pretty steady across. Everybody gets gas. Everybody's got car insurance. I mean, not everybody has car insurance, but a lot of people do. I guess not everybody buys gasoline, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Everybody eats. So everybody feels those price increases. Wage growth depends on the company you work, depends if you switch jobs, depends where you live, depends on all sorts of other factors. And so for lots of people, they're seeing significantly better wage growth than inflation over the last several years. For other people, they're making less. They're not doing, and for others, they're right in the middle there. We've got this trade publication, the Kobesi letter, that actually dug even deeper into these numbers. If we can pull this up, they say they dug in on super core inflation, and what they found is even more disturbing than what,
and this is
what
the
you're seeing
Fed
reported.
follows super core
Right.
inflation.
Yeah, and so they say on a 3-month annualized basis, super core inflation jumped 6.9% in February, which is huge. That's pushing back to 2022 levels. Core services, less shelter inflation is a key metric that the Fed follows. So in January, the metric jumped 0.7% month over month, the biggest jump since September 2022. In February, it was up another 0.5 point month over month after multiple increases in 23. They say, all while real wage growth is turning negative again, the fight against inflation is far from over. So inflation is one thing if wages are growing faster than inflation. If wages are losing purchasing power to inflation, that's when things turn deeply ugly again.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of positive signs, but also could potentially be some really negative stuff. And I mean, there is really negative stuff if you're looking under the hood. But trends, of course, could continue to go into a frightening direction for a whole lot of people. Ryan, speaking of frightening directions, we should move to Haiti. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.